Have you ever wondered what it would be like to journey through the afterlife? To walk through the depths of hell, climb the mountain of purgatory, and descend into the heavens? One man did, and he wrote it all down in one of the greatest literary masterpieces ever created. Tonight, we're diving into the heart of the Renaissance to explore the world of Dante Alighieri and his epic poem, The Divine Comedy. The Renaissance, a period of rebirth spanning from the 14th to the 17th century, was a time of incredible change in Europe. It was a cultural explosion, a rediscovery of classical art, literature, and philosophy from ancient Greece and Rome. After the long, often dark, Middle Ages, thinkers and artists began looking at the world and humanity's place in it in a brand new light. And now, before your mind drifts deeper into this peaceful journey, take just a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Because every night, with true stories from the Renaissance, you'll fall asleep calmer, deeper, and more at peace. This wasn't just about painting and sculpture, it was a fundamental shift in consciousness. The focus moved from a purely divine-centered worldview to one that celebrated human potential, reason, and individual achievement. This movement, known as humanism, is the engine that powered the Renaissance. And right at the dawn of this magnificent era stands our protagonist, Dante. Born in Florence, Italy, in 1265, Dante was more than just a poet. He was a politician, a philosopher, and a man deeply entangled in the turbulent politics of his time. Florence was a city divided by fierce political factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibelli. Dante, a Guelph himself, was eventually exiled from his beloved city, a painful event that would profoundly shape his life and his work. It was in this exile, wandering through Italy, that he began to compose his life's magnum opus. He didn't call it the Divine Comedy. He simply called it Commedia, or comedy. In his time, a comedy was any story that started in misery and ended in happiness, unlike a tragedy, which did the opposite. The divine part was added later by another famous writer, Boccaccio, to honor its sacred subject matter and its sublime quality. And it truly is divine. The poem is a monumental work, an allegory of the soul's journey towards God. It's structured in three parts: Or Canticas, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. The journey begins on Good Friday in the year 1300. Dante, our narrator and protagonist, finds himself lost in a dark wood, symbolizing a state of sin and spiritual confusion. He's blocked by three beasts: a leopard, a lion, and a Shiva representing different types of sin. Just when he's about to despair, a figure appears. It is the ghost of the Roman poet Virgil, one of Dante's greatest heroes. Virgil explains that he has been sent by Beatrice, Dante's long-lost love, to guide him on a journey through the afterlife. And so, their epic trek begins with Inferno Hill. Dante's Hill is not just a fiery pit. It's a meticulously organized, terrifyingly logical structure. It's a vast, funnel-shaped abyss, dug deep into the earth, with 9 descending circles. Each circle holds souls guilty of a specific type of sin, and the punishment they endure is a form of poetic justice, known as contrapasso. This means the punishment fits the crime, often in a symbolic or ironic way. For example, the lustful, who were swept away by their passions in life, are now forever swept about by a violent, never-ending storm. The gluttonous lying afoul, icy slush, pelted by a ceaseless, filthy rain. As Dante and Virgil descend deeper, the sins become more severe and the punishments more horrific. They meet famous figures from history and mythology, as well as many of Dante's own political enemies from Florence. Placing his foes in various circles of hell was Dante's ultimate revenge. In the lowest circle, Cositas of Frozy Lake, are those who committed the worst sin of all. Treachery, here frozen in ice, are traitors to their family, their country, and their lords. And at the very center of the earth, at the bottom of hell, is Lucifer himself. He's a monstrous, three-faced beast, trapped in ice, chewing on the three greatest traitors in history. Judas, who betrayed Jesus, and Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Julius Caesar. Seeing this ultimate evil, Dante and Virgil climb down Lucifer's shaggy legs and emerge on the other side of the world. From the darkness of Inferno, they emerge under a starry sky at the base of a great mountain rising from the sea. Mount Purgatory, this is Purgatorio, the realm of hope. Unlike hell, where souls are damned for eternity, the souls in purgatory are on their way to heaven. They are cleansing themselves of their sins so they can be worthy of entering paradise. Purgatory is structured into 7 terraces, one for each of the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and lust. Here, the contrapasso is reversed. Instead of a punishment that mimics the sin, the souls engage in acts that counteract their earthly failings. The proud are bent low, carrying heavy stones on their backs, learning humility. The envious have their eyes sewn shut with iron wire because they looked upon the good fortune of others with malice. The atmosphere here is completely different from hell. There is sorrow for past sins, but also fellowship, prayer, and the beautiful, hopeful anticipation of salvation. As Dante climbs the mountain, he is purged of his own sinful tendency. At the summit of Mount Purgatory is the earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden. It's here that Dante must say a tearful goodbye to his guide. Virgil, as a pagan who lived before Christ, Virgil cannot enter heaven. But as he leaves, a new guide appears. It is Beatrice, the woman Dante loved from afar his entire life. She represents divine love and revelation, and she will be his guide for the final, most glorious part of his journey. With Beatrice at his side, Dante ascends into Paradiso. Dante's paradise is not a place of fluffy clouds and harps. It is a complex, dazzling cosmos based on medieval astronomy. It consists of 9 celestial spheres, each a planet or star concentric around the earth. As Dante and Beatrice ascend through these spheres d'amore, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, and so on, they meet the souls of the blessed. These souls, the saints and the righteous, are arranged according to their capacity for love and their specific virtues. Unlike the tormented souls in hell, the blessed in heaven are filled with joy and light. They explain complex theological concepts to Dante, helping him to understand the nature of God, free will, and divine justice. The light and glory grow more intense as they ascend, until they reach the highest heaven, This is a realm beyond physical space and time, the true home of God and all the blessed souls. Here, Dante sees the saints arranged in the form of a celestial white rose, all gazing upon God. And finally, Dante is granted a fleeting, momentary vision of God himself, not as a human figure, but as 3 circles of light, a profound mystery representing the Holy Trinity. In that final, blinding flash of understanding, Dante's intellect and desire are aligned with the divine love that, as he famously writes, moves the sun and the other stars. His journey is complete. He has gone from being lost in a dark wood to looking upon the face of God. The Divine Comedy is so much more than just a story. it was revolutionary. Dante chose to write it not in Latin, the formal language of scholars and the church, but in the Italian vernacular, the language of the common people. This bold move helped to establish Italian as a legitimate literary language and made his profound work accessible to a much wider audience. He synthesized 1,000 years of medieval thought philosophy, science, and blended it with classical mythology and contemporary politics. He created a vivid, unforgettable universe that has captivated readers, scholars, and artists. For over 700 years, Dante's masterpiece is a perfect embodiment of the Renaissance spirit. It is deeply rooted in the medieval Christian worldview, yet it is also a powerful celebration of human experience, intellect, and the individual's journey. Dante, the pilgrim, is not a passive observer. He is an active participant who questions, learns, and grows. His journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise is a journey into the human soul itself, exploring our capacity for sin, our struggle for redemption, and our ultimate potential for divine love. It is a timeless story that reminds us that even when we find ourselves lost in a dark wood, there is always a path toward the light. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live through a cultural explosion? A time when art, science, and ideas were reborn, changing the world forever. That's exactly what happened during the Renaissance, a phenomenal period stretching from the 14th to the 17th century. The word Renaissance literally means rebirth, and it was a rebirth of classical knowledge, creativity, and a whole new way of looking at the world and ourselves. But how did it all begin? Where did the first spark of this incredible transformation come from? To find the answer, we need to travel back to 14th century Italy, a landscape of bustling city-states, wealthy merchants, and a growing dissatisfaction with the rigid intellectual traditions of the Middle Ages. And at the heart of this shift, we find a man named Francesco Petrarch. He wasn't a king or a general, but a poet and a scholar, and his passion for the past would ignite the future. Petrarch is often called the father of humanism, and for a very good reason. So, what exactly is humanism? Don't let the word intimidate you. At its core, it was a revolutionary intellectual movement that shifted the focus from the purely divine-centered worldview of the Middle Ages to a new appreciation for human potential, human achievements, and human experience. Humanists didn't reject faith. Rather, they believed that humanity was God's greatest creation, and that studying human history, literature, and philosophy was a way to better understand both ourselves and the divine. They looked back to the classical worlds of ancient Greece and Rome not as pagan relics, but as a treasure trove of wisdom, eloquence, and virtue. Petrarch was the ultimate intellectual archaeologist. He had an obsessive, almost fanatical passion for hunting down lost classical texts. Imagine him traveling from monastery to monastery, digging through dusty, forgotten libraries, his heart pounding when he'd uncover a long-lost manuscript by Cicero or Virgil. For him, these weren't just old books. They were living voices, conversations with the greatest minds of antiquity. He famously discovered a collection of Cicero's personal letters, and it was a revelation. Here was Cicero not just as a great orator, but as a persona friend, a father, a man with worries and ambitions. This discovery helped Petrarch realize that the ancients were complex human beings, just like him. This personal connection was key. Petrarch didn't just study these texts, he engaged with them. He wrote imaginary letters to his classical heroes like Cicero and Seneca, debating with them, sharing his own thoughts and feelings. This practice highlighted a core tenet of humanism: the importance of the individual's inner life, their thoughts, emotions, and personal journey. His most famous work, the Canzoniere, is a collection of 366 poems, mostly dedicated to a woman named Laura. Through these sonnets, he explored the complexities of love, longing, and personal turmoil with a psychological depth that was completely new for his time. He turned the focus inward, making the individual's emotional landscape a worthy subject of great art. But Petrarch's influence went far beyond his own writing. He championed the idea of the studia humanitatis, the humanities. This was a new curriculum focused on grammar, rhetoric, history, poetry, and moral philosophy, all based on classical models. The goal wasn't just to be knowledgeable, but to be a well-rounded, eloquent, and virtuous individual. He believed that by studying the best examples of human thought and expression from the past, we could learn how to live better, more meaningful lives in the present. This educational philosophy would become the bedrock of Renaissance learning, shaping universities and influencing thinkers for centuries. Petrarch's ideas spread like wildfire, first through Italy and then across all of Europe. His emphasis on rediscovering and imitating classical Latin led to a purification of the language, moving away from the more functional Latin of the medieval church towards the eloquent, persuasive style of the Roman masters. This reverence for classical forms didn't just stay in literature. It inspired architects to study Vitruvius and build magnificent domes like Brunelleschi's in Florence. It inspired sculptors like Donatello and Michelangelo to study Roman statues and capture the human form with unprecedented realism and emotion. It inspired political thinkers like Machiavelli to analyze Roman history to understand the nature of power. The spirit of humanism that Petrarch championed created a culture of curiosity, critical inquiry, and immense creativity. It fostered the idea that man was the measure of all things, capable of incredible feats of intellect and artistry. This newfound confidence in human ability is what powered the entire Renaissance, from Leonardo da Vinci's scientific sketches and artistic masterpieces to the voyages of discovery that expanded the known world. It all traces back to this fundamental shift in perspective. It was a shift that celebrated human agency and the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. Think about the legacy every time you study literature, history, or philosophy. You're engaging in the tradition of the humanities that Petrarch helped to establish. The very idea that education should make us not just smarter, but better, more articulate, and more thoughtful human beings is a direct inheritance from Renaissance humanism. Petrarch and his fellow humanists taught us to look to the past not to be trapped by it, but to find inspiration for the future. They showed us the power of words to shape reality and the infinite value of the human mind and spirit. So, the next time you marvel at a Renaissance painting or read a line from Shakespeare, remember the scholar in his library poring over ancient scrolls. Remember Petrarch, the man whose love for old books sparked a rebirth that redefined what it means to be human and set the stage for the modern world. He reminds us that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin not with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page. Boccaccio and the Decameron stories. Tonight, we re-journeying back in time to one of the most fascinating periods in human history, the Renaissance. Forget what you think you know from movies and games. This wasn't just about people in tights and fancy hats. This was a revolutionary era, a rebirth of art, science, and ideas that completely reshaped the world and laid the groundwork for the modern age we live in today. So, what exactly was the Renaissance? spanning roughly from the 14th to the 17th century. It was a period of intense cultural and intellectual change that began in Italy and gradually spread across Europe. After the long, often difficult period known as the Middle Ages, people started looking back to the classical wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was a powerful movement called humanism. Humanism placed a new emphasis on human potential, individual achievement, and life here on earth, rather than focusing solely on the afterlife. It championed reason, critical thinking, and the pursuit of knowledge in all its forms. Think about the names that pop into your head when you hear Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. These weren't just artists, they were true Renaissance men. They were painters, sculptors, architects, inventors, and scientists all rolled into one. Da Vinci didn't just paint the Mona Lisa. He designed flying machines and studied human anatomy in incredible detail. Michelangelo didn't just sculpt the statue of David. He painted the breathtaking ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. This explosion of creativity was fueled by wealthy patrons, like the famous Medici family in Florence, who invested heavily in the arts, understanding that it brought prestige and power to their cities. This support allowed artists the freedom to experiment and push boundaries like never before, leading to masterpieces that still captivate us centuries later. But the Renaissance wasn't just about painting and sculpture. Science was also taking giant leaps forward. Figures like Nicolaus Copernicus and Galileo Galilei challenged long-held beliefs about the universe. Copernicus proposed a heliocentric model, suggesting that the Earth and other planets revolved around the Sun, not the other way around. This was a radical, world-altering idea. Later, Galileo, using the newly invented telescope, provided evidence to support this theory, though it got him into a bit of trouble. These scientific advancements were all about observation, experimentation, and questioning the status quo, a true hallmark of the Renaissance spirit. And you couldn't have this explosion of ideas without a way to spread them. This is where Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press in the mid-5th, 10th century becomes a game. Before the printing press, books were handwritten, incredibly expensive and rare. Suddenly, knowledge could be mass-produced. Books, pamphlets, and scientific papers could be distributed quickly and widely, accelerating the spread of Renaissance ideas across the entire continent. Literacy rates began to rise, and information was no longer the exclusive property of the church and the super wealthy. It was the internet of its day, a truly democratizing force for knowledge. Now, I want to zoom in on a figure who perfectly captures the early spirit of the Renaissance. Even before it was in full swing, Giovanni Boccaccio, living in 14th century Florence, Boccaccio was a writer, poet, and a pioneer of humanism. He was a contemporary of other literary giants like Petrarch and Dante, and together they formed the Three Crowns of Florence, who helped establish the Italian language as a serious literary medium. Boccaccio is most famous for his masterpiece, the Decameron. And this book, folks, is truly something special. The story's frame is set during a terrifying historical event, the Black Death, the plague that devastated Florence in 1348. To escape the horrors of the plague-ridden city, a group of 7 young women and 3 young men take refuge in a secluded villa in the countryside. To pass the time and keep their spirits up, they decide that each person will tell 1 story per day for 10 days. Decameron literally means 10 days' work. This structure gives us a collection of 100 brilliant dailies. What makes the Decameron so revolutionary? Well, Unlike the epic poems and religious texts that dominated the Middle Ages, Boccaccio's stories are about everyday people. They're about merchants, lovers, tricksters, and clergy. The stories are incredibly diverse, ranging from hilarious and witty comedies to tragic romances and clever fables. They explore the full spectrum of human experience: love, loss, intelligence, foolishness, virtue, and vice. Boccaccio writes with a sharp, observant eye and a deep understanding of human nature. He doesn't shy away from depicting the flaws and absurdities of people, regardless of their social standing. Priests can be corrupt, nobles can be foolish, and clever servants often outsmart their masters. This focus on realism and the human condition is pure Renaissance. Boccaccio is celebrating wit, ingenuity, and the power of the individual to navigate a complex and often chaotic world. He uses vernacular Italian, the language of the people, making his work accessible and relatable in a way that Latin texts could never be. He finds heroism and comedy not in grand battles or divine interventions, but in the cleverness of a quick-witted woman or the follies of a jealous husband. The Decameron is a monument to storytelling and a vivid tapestry of 14th century life. It shows that even in the darkest of times, humanity endures through stories, laughter, and connection. So, from the genius of Da Vinci to the groundbreaking tales of Boccaccio, the Renaissance was a period that redefined what it meant to be human. It was a time of immense turmoil, but also of unparalleled creativity and intellectual courage. It taught us to look at the world with fresh eyes, to question everything, and to celebrate the incredible potential that lies within each of us. The echoes of this incredible era are still all around us, in our art, our science, and our very way of thinking. Have you ever wondered why we still study Shakespeare, a writer from over 400 years ago? Why do his plays and sonnets continue to captivate audiences, inspire blockbuster movies, and get quoted in everyday conversations? The answer isn't just about his genius with words. It's also about the incredible era he lived in, the Renaissance. To truly understand Shakespeare, we need to travel back in time to a period of explosive change that completely reshaped the world, and with it, the English language and its literature. So, what exactly was the Renaissance? The word itself means rebirth, and that's the perfect description. Beginning in Italy around the 14th century and spreading across Europe, it was a rebirth of art, science, philosophy, and curiosity. After the long, relatively static period of the Middle Ages, people started looking back to the classical wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome. They rediscovered old texts, marveled at ancient sculptures, and were inspired by classical ideas about humanity, government, and the universe. This wasn't just an academic exercise. This rediscovery sparked a powerful new philosophy called humanism. Before the Renaissance, the focus was almost entirely on God and the afterlife. Humanism didn't reject religion, but it placed a new and profound emphasis on human beings, our potential, our experiences, our emotions, and our place in the world. Suddenly, the individual mattered. Thinkers like Petrarch and Erasmus championed the idea that humans were capable of great things, not just in the next life, but right here on Earth. This shift in focus from the divine to the human is the absolute key to understanding the art and literature of the time. By the time this wave of change reached England in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, it set the stage for a golden age of literature. And at the very heart of this golden age was William Shakespeare. Born in 1564, Shakespeare grew up in a world buzzing with these new ideas. England was experiencing a surge of national pride under Queen Elizabeth I. Exploration was opening up new continents, science was challenging old beliefs, and the printing press, a revolutionary invention, was making books and knowledge more accessible than ever before. It was a time of immense optimism, but also of great uncertainty and social upheaval. This vibrant, complex, and often contradictory world became the raw material for Shakespeare's plays. Let's look at how humanism shines through in his work. Think of Hamlet. This isn't just a simple revenge story. It's a deep, psychological dive into one man's mind. We see Hamlet's stout, his grief, his intellectual struggles, and his famous question, to be or not to be. He is a character defined by his internal conflict and his complex humanity. This intense focus on a character's inner life, their motivations, and their flaws is a direct product of Renaissance humanism. Before this, characters were often simple archetypes: the good knight, the evil villain. Shakespeare gave us characters who felt real, who were messy, brilliant, and deeply human, just like us. The Renaissance also revived the classical forms of tragedy and comedy from ancient Greece and Rome. Shakespeare didn't just copy these forms, he perfected them. He studied the structure of Roman playwrights like Seneca for his tragedies, but he infused them with a new psychological depth. In plays like King Lear or Macbeth, we see powerful men brought low not just by fate, but by their own ambition, pride, and poor judgment, their tragic flaws. These are timeless human struggles. Similarly, his comedies, like A Midsummer Night's Dream or Twelfth Night, are filled with witty wordplay, mistaken identities, and clever servants. All elements borrowed from classical comedy, but given a distinctly English and modern flair. And what about the language itself? The English language was exploding during the Renaissance. It was a living, breathing, and rapidly growing thing. Writers were borrowing words from Latin, Greek, French, and Italian, and they were inventing new ones. And no one was more inventive than Shakespeare. It's estimated that he introduced over 1,700 words to the English language. Words like eyeball, swagger, fashionable, and lonely. We use them every day, and they came from his pen. He wasn't just writing stories. He was literally building the language we speak today. He played with grammar, sentence structure, and rhythm, using the raw, flexible power of English to create poetry of unparalleled beauty and emotional impact. Furthermore, the Renaissance spirit of inquiry and questioning the established order is everywhere in Shakespeare's plays. He constantly explores complex, moral, and political questions. Is it right to overthrow a corrupt king, as in Richard II? What is the nature of justice and mercy as debated in The Merchant of Venice? He doesn't give us easy answers. Instead, he presents different viewpoints through his characters, forcing the audience to think for themselves. His plays became a public forum for debating the most pressing issues of the day, from the nature of leadership to the complexities of love and jealousy. This willingness to tackle big, uncomfortable questions is another hallmark of the Renaissance mind. In The Tempest, one of his later plays, we see a culmination of these themes. The main character, Prospero, is a magician, but he's also a scholar, a humanist, intellectual. He uses his knowledge to control nature and manipulate others, but in the end, he chooses forgiveness and gives up his power, acknowledging his own humanity. The play explores themes of colonialism, power, and reconciliation, reflecting the real-world issues of England's dawning age of exploration. It perfectly captures the blend of wonder, power, and moral responsibility that defined the Renaissance. So, when we watch a Shakespeare play, we're not just watching a 400-year-old story. We are witnessing the very soul of the Renaissance brought to life. We see the celebration of the individual in his complex characters. We see the rediscovery of classical forms in his masterful tragedies and comedies. We hear the explosion of language in his incredible poetry and wordplay. And we feel the spirit of inquiry in the timeless questions he poses. Shakespeare took the intellectual and artistic energy of the Renaissance and channeled it into works that were not only brilliant for his time, but have remained profoundly relevant for all time. He showed us what it means to be human with all our flaws and all our potential for greatness. And that is why, centuries later, the curtain still rises on his stage. Love literature in the Renaissance. Tonight, we're journeying back in time to an era of explosive creativity, intellectual rebirth, and, of course, passionate love. That's right. We're diving deep into the world of love literature during the Renaissance. From the 14th to the 17th century, Europe was buzzing with new ideas, and the way people thought about and wrote about love was completely transformed. So, grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's explore the sonnets, plays, and epic poems that still make our hearts flutter today. Before the Renaissance, love in literature was often tied to the rigid codes of chivalry and courtly love. It was idealized, often unattainable, and very formulaic. But then, something incredible happened. A new movement called humanism emerged, placing a greater emphasis on human experience, emotions, and individualism. Writers started looking back to the classical works of ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration, and they began to portray love in a much more personal and psychologically complex way. Our journey begins in 14th century Italy, the cradle of the Renaissance, with a man who arguably invented the modern love poem. His collection of poems, the Canzoniere, was a revolutionary work dedicated to his unrequited love for a woman named Laura. For the first time, a poet chronicled his entire emotional journey, the initial infatuation, the hope, the despair, the jealousy, and the eventual spiritual acceptance after her death. Petrarch wasn't just writing about an idealized lady on a pedestal, he was dissecting his own heart. He perfected the sonnet form, a 14-line poem with a strict rhyme scheme, which would become the go-to structure for love poetry for centuries. Think of him as the original Taylor Swift, turning his heartbreak into timeless art that resonated with everyone. His influence was so immense that poets all across Europe started imitating his style, creating what we now call Petrarchanism. As the Renaissance spread from Italy, it blossomed in other countries, each adding its own unique flavor to love literature. In France, we see poets like Pierre. He took the Petrarchan model but made it distinctly French. His famous line, "Gather the rosebuds," while the May from his poem to Helene, is a beautiful example of the Carpe Diem or seize the day theme. He urged his beloved not to waste her youth and beauty, a plea that was both romantic and a little bit cheeky. This blend of classical elegance and a very human sense of urgency was a hallmark of the French Renaissance. Now, let's cross the English Channel to Elizabethan England, a golden age for literature. And you can't talk about love in English literature without talking about the master himself, William Shakespeare. Shakespeare took the sonnet form and completely turned it on its head. While his contemporaries were still writing overly flowery praises to idealized blonde beauties, Shakespeare got real. His sonnets, addressed to both a mysterious, dark lady and a fair youth, explored the messy, complicated, and sometimes dark side of love. He wrote about lust, betrayal, jealousy, and the painful realities of aging. His famous sonnet 130, which begins "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun," is a direct parody of the exaggerated Petrarchan cliché. He was saying, "I love a real woman with all her imperfections, and that love is more genuine than any poetic fantasy." But Shakespeare didn't just stop at sonnets. His plays are a masterclass in the many faces of love. We have the tragic, all-consuming passion of Romeo and Juliet, a story of two young lovers whose affection defies their feuding families, leading to a devastating end. Their love is intense, impulsive, and ultimately fatal, questioning the societal barriers that stand in its way. Then you have the witty, combative courtship of Beatrice and Benedick in Much Ado About Nothing. They trade insults and declare they can't stand each other, but their verbal sparring is just a mask for a deep and genuine attraction. This gave us the enemies to lovers trope that we still adore in our rom-coms today. Through his plays, Shakespeare showed that love could be tragic, comedic, foolish, and profound, often all at the same time. While Shakespeare was dominating the stage, other English poets were also exploring new dimensions of love. Take John Donne, a leading figure of the metaphysical poets. Donne's poetry is intellectually dazzling and emotionally raw. He used complex, unconventional metaphors called conceits to express the union of two lovers. For example, in a valediction forbidding mourning, he compares the souls of two lovers to the two legs of a drawing compass. One stays fixed while the other roams, but they are forever connected and linked towards each other. It's a strange image, but it's incredibly powerful. For Donne, love wasn't just a matter of the heart. It was a fusion of the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual, complete union of two souls. This was a far more philosophical and intense take on love than the courtly poems that came before. So, what changed? Why did literature move from the distant, idealized love of the medieval period to the passionate, personal, and complex portrayals of the Renaissance? It was a perfect storm of social and intellectual shifts. The rise of humanism encouraged a focus on individual feelings. The invention of the printing press meant that literature was no longer confined to the wealthy elite. It could reach a wider audience who were hungry for stories that reflected their own experiences. And the growing merchant class meant more people had the leisure time and education to read and appreciate these works. The legacy of Renaissance love literature is absolutely massive. These writers didn't just create beautiful poems and plays. They fundamentally shaped our modern understanding of love. The idea that love is a powerful, personal, and transformative journey. The sonnet as the ultimate declaration of affection. The witty banter of a romantic comedy. The gut-wrenching tragedy of star-crossed lovers. All these concepts were forged in the creative fire of the Renaissance. When a songwriter today sings about their personal heartbreak, they are following in the footsteps of Petrarch. When a movie shows two characters falling in love through clever dialogue, they are channeling the spirit of Shakespeare's Beatrice and Benedick. From Petrarch's Lonely Laments in Italy to Shakespeare's romantic stages in England, the Renaissance gave voice to the human heart in ways that had never been heard before. It taught us that love is not just a simple, happy emotion. It's a complex tapestry of joy, pain, desire, and devotion. And that's why these stories, written hundreds of years ago, still feel so relevant and powerful today. They remind us that whilst times change, the core of human emotion remains timeless. Ever wondered what the world of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Shakespeare sounded like? We often picture the stunning art and groundbreaking discoveries of the Renaissance. But there was an equally revolutionary soundtrack to this era of rebirth. This wasn't just background noise, it was a radical transformation in music that laid the foundation for everything we listen to today, from classical symphonies to the pop songs on your playlist. So, let's close our eyes for a moment, step back in time, and listen to the incredible story of Renaissance music before the Renaissance. Think of music in a medieval cathedral. The sound was often a single, flowing, melodic line, what we call monophony, like Gregorian chant. It's beautiful, it's spiritual, but it's one voice, one line. The Renaissance said, what if we add more? This shift from one line to many is the single most important development of the era. It's the birth of widespread polyphony, poly meaning many, and phony meaning sounds. Imagine multiple independent melodies, all weaving together in a rich, intricate tapestry of sound. It was like going from a 2D drawing to a 3D sculpture. This explosion of complexity didn't happen overnight. It began in the 14th century, a period sometimes called the Ars Nova or New Art, primarily in France and Italy. Composers like Guillaume de Machaut started experimenting. They developed new ways to write down rhythm, which was crucial. How can you have multiple people singing different things if they can't agree on the timing? This new rhythmic notation allowed for syncopation and a level of intricacy that was previously impossible. It was the musical equivalent of inventing a new set of architectural tools, allowing for structures of breathtaking complexity. The music became more expressive, more human, and less rigidly tied to old formulas. As we move into the 15th century, the center of musical innovation shifts north to what was then Burgundy and the Low Countries modern day, Belgium, Netherlands, and northern France. This is the era of the Franco-Flemish school and its masters, like Guillaume Dufay and Josquin des Prez, were the rock stars of their day. They traveled all over Europe, working in the grand cathedrals and lavish courts of Italy and France, spreading their style wherever they went. What made their music so special? A key technique was imitation. You've probably sung around like row, row, row your boat, right? That's a simple form of imitation. Now, imagine that idea, but infinitely more sophisticated. One voice would start with a beautiful melodic phrase, and then another voice would enter, imitating that same phrase, while the first voice continued with something new, then a third, and a fourth. The result is a seamless, flowing cascade of sound, where each voice is both independent and part of a unified whole. It creates a feeling of celestial harmony and perfect balance, a core ideal of the Renaissance mindset. Josquin des Prez, in particular, was hailed as a genius. Martin Luther himself said, "Josquin is the master of the notes. They must do as he wills." Other composers must do as the notes will. He had an unparalleled ability to match the music to the meaning of the text. If the words spoke of heaven, the music would soar upwards. If they spoke of sorrow, the music would be filled with poignant, dissonant notes that tugged at the heartstrings. This was a huge step forward in making music an emotional, expressive art form, not just a mathematical exercise. Now, while all this amazing innovation was happening in sacred music for the church, what were regular people listening to? The Renaissance also saw a boom in secular music, music for dancing, for parties, for love. One of the most popular forms was the madrigal, which originated in Italy. Madrigals were polyphonic songs, usually for 4 to 6 voices, set to haiku poetry, and they were all about word painting. If the poem mentioned a sigh, the music might feature a falling, breath-like phrase. If it mentioned birds chirping, you'd hear fast, twittering musical figures. It was playful, dramatic, and intensely emotional. Composers like Claudio Monteverdi pushed the madrigal to its limits, using daring harmonies and dramatic contrasts to express the full spectrum of human feeling, from ecstatic love to agonizing heartbreak. Meanwhile, back in the church, a major event was about to shake the foundations of Europe: the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, who we mentioned earlier, believed congregational singing was vital. He wanted everyone to participate, not just the trained choir. This led to the development of the chorale, a simple, memorable hymn tune that the whole congregation could sing in their own language, not Latin. Composers then took these simple chorales and used them as the basis for more complex polyphonic works, creating a uniquely powerful style of Protestant church music. The Catholic Church responded with its own musical reforms, known as the Counter-Reformation, at the Council of Trent. Some church leaders worried that polyphony had become too complicated. They felt the words were getting lost in the dense web of melodies. The legend goes that the music of one composer, Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina, saved polyphony from being banned. His style was the epitome of clarity and balance. His massas, like the famous Missa Papae Marcelli, demonstrated that you could write beautiful, complex, polyphonic music where the sacred text was still perfectly clear and understandable. Palestrina's pure, serene style became the model for Catholic Church music for centuries to come. As we near the end of the Renaissance, around the turn of the 17th century, things start to get even more dramatic. In Venice, at the magnificent St. Mark's Basilica, composers like Giovanni Gabrieli were taking advantage of the building's unique architecture. It had multiple choir lofts, so Gabrieli started writing music for separated groups of singers and instrumentalists, calling back and forth to each other across the vast space. This created a stunning stereo effect, a surround sound experience for the 16th century listener. He also specified which instruments should play which parts, a novel idea at the time, and incorporated brass instruments like trumpets and trombones, adding a new level of grandeur and power. This Venetian style, with its focus on contrast, drama, and rich instrumental color, was a direct bridge to the next great musical era. The Baroque composers like Claudio Monteverdi, who we met as a master of the madrigal, would go on to write the first great opera, combining music, drama, and spectacle in a way that truly marks the end of the Renaissance and the beginning of a new age. So, from the intricate notation of the Ars Nova to the balanced perfection of Palestrina and the spectacular serene sound of Gabrieli, the Renaissance was a period of incredible musical change. It took music from a single melodic line and transformed it into a rich, three-dimensional art form capable of expressing the deepest human emotions. It established the vocal and instrumental groupings we recognize today and perfected the art of harmony and counterpoint. The next time you see a painting by Raphael or read a sonnet by Shakespeare, take a moment to imagine the music that filled the air around them, a sound as revolutionary, as beautiful, and as profoundly human as any of their masters. The influence of vernacular languages on literature. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most game-changing shifts in literary history: the rise of vernacular languages during the Renaissance. It's a story about how everyday language, the language you and I speak, completely revolutionized art, culture, and how people saw the world. So, let's set the stage. Before the Renaissance, which spanned roughly from the 14th to the 17th century. If you were to read or write anything important in Europe, you'd be using Latin. Latin was the language of the church, of scholars, of government, and of all serious literature. It 'Twas the universal language of the educated elite. But here's the catch. Most people didn't speak Latin. They spoke what we call vernacular languages early, forms of Italian, French, German, English, and Spanish. For the average person, literature and official documents were completely inaccessible, locked away in a language they couldn't understand. Now, imagine living in a world where the most profound ideas, the most beautiful poetry, and even the laws that governed your life were written in a language you didn't speak. It created a massive cultural divide, but during the Renaissance, something incredible started to happen. A new wave of thinkers, writers, and artists began to challenge this status quo. They started asking a revolutionary question. Why could we create great works of art in the language of the people? This wasn't just a stylistic choice. It was a radical act. It was about making literature accessible, relatable, and personal. And the pioneers of this movement were absolute giants. Let's start in Italy, the cradle of the Renaissance. We have three figures often called the three crowns of Italian literature: Dante Alighieri, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. Dante is probably the most famous. His masterpiece, the Divine Comedy, wasn't written in lofty Latin. It was written in the Tuscan dialect of Italian, the language spoken on the streets of Florence. This was a bold, almost audacious move. The Divine Comedy is an epic journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise, dealing with complex theology, philosophy, and politics. By writing it in the vernacular, Dante was making a powerful statement that Italian was just as capable as Latin of expressing the deepest, most complex human experiences. He was essentially saying that the everyday language of his people was worthy of immortal art. This single act helped to standardize the Italian language and elevate it to a literary powerhouse. Then there's Petrarch, often called the father of humanism. While he wrote plenty in Latin, he's most celebrated today for his Consegna, a collection of beautiful poems written in Italian about his unrequited love for a woman named Laura. These sonnets were intensely personal and emotional. By using the vernacular, Petrarch brought a new level of intimacy and psychological depth to poetry. Readers could connect with his feelings of love, longing, and sorrow in their own tongue. It was no longer an abstract intellectual exercise. It was raw, human emotion. And we can't forget Boccaccio, whose work, the Decameron, is a collection of 100 tales told by a group of young people sheltering from the Black Death, written in lively, colloquial Italian. These stories are about ordinary life. They're funny, tragic, and sometimes a bit scandalous. Boccaccio captured the voice of the common person, their wit, their desires, and their flaws. He showed that the vernacular was perfect for storytelling, for capturing the vibrant, messy, and beautiful reality of human society. The impact of these Italian pioneers was massive. Their success inspired writers all across Europe to look at their own languages with new eyes. In France, writers like François Rabelais used the vernacular to write satirical and hilariously over-the-top novels like Gargantua and Pantagruel. In Spain, Miguel de Cervantes wrote Don Quixote, considered one of the greatest novels ever in Spanish. It's a profound and funny exploration of idealism and reality, all told in the language of the Spanish people. And of course, we have to talk about England. The English language was undergoing its own transformation. Geoffrey Chaucer, writing a bit before the main Renaissance period, but deeply influencing it, made a monumental step with the Canterbury Tales. He wrote in Middle English, capturing the voices of a diverse group of pilgrims from all walks of life. This was usual. It showed that English could be a powerful vehicle for storytelling and social commentary. A couple of centuries later, this movement reached its peak with a writer you may have heard of, William Shakespeare. Shakespeare didn't just use English. He transformed it. He played with it, invented new words, and crafted phrases we still use today. His plays, from Hamlet to Romeo and Juliet, were written in the English of his time, the language of the court and the tavern. They were performed for nobles and commoners alike. By writing in the vernacular, Shakespeare made his timeless stories of love, tragedy, and ambition accessible to everyone. He proved, beyond any doubt, that English was a language of incredible power and poetic beauty. So, what was the big picture effect of all this? First, the rise of vernacular literature helped to form national identities. When people started reading and sharing stories in a common language, it strengthened their sense of belonging to a shared Culturean, Italian, French, or English culture. Languages were standardized, and a shared literary heritage was born. Second, it was a massive boost for literacy and education. Suddenly, there was a reason for ordinary people to learn to read. Literature was no longer just for monks and scholars. With the invention of the printing press around 1440, these vernacular works could be mass-produced and distributed widely. This created a new reading public hungry for stories and ideas in their own language. It was the democratization of knowledge. And finally, it fueled the very spirit of the Renaissance. Humanism. Humanism celebrated human potential, individual experience, and the world we live in. Writing in the vernacular was the perfect expression of this. It put the human experience with all its love, pain, humor, and complexity front and center, expressed in the language that people actually used to live their lives. It was a shift from the divine to the human, from the abstract to the immediate. So, the next time you pick up a novel, remember this incredible revolution. This simple act of writing in the language of the people broke down centuries-old barriers, forged new nations, and unleashed a wave of creative genius that we're still feeling the effects of today. It was a declaration that everyone's voice matters, and that great art can and should speak to us all. Book printing and the Cultural Revolution. Tonight, we're journeying back in time to one of the most transformative periods in human history, the Renaissance, spanning from the 14th to the 17th century. This wasn't just an era of magnificent art, it was a profound cultural rebirth that reshaped the very fabric of society. And at the heart of this revolution was a groundbreaking invention: the printing press. Imagine a world without books, or rather, a world where books were so rare and expensive that only the wealthiest nobles and the most powerful clergy could ever hope to own one. Each book was a masterpiece, painstakingly copied by hand by scribes, a process that could take months, even years. This scarcity of knowledge meant that information was a luxury, controlled by a select few. The vast majority of people lived and died without ever learning to read, their understanding of the world shaped entirely by tradition and the word of local authorities. This was the world before the mid-15th century. Then, around 1440, in Mainz, Germany, a goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg had an idea that would change everything. He developed a system of movable type printing. Instead of carving an entire page onto a single wooden block, Gutenberg created individual metal letters that could be arranged and rearranged to form text. This meant that pages could be set, printed, and then the type could be reused for the next page, combined with a screw press, which was adapted from wine and paper presses. He could produce books at a speed and scale that was previously unimaginable. The first major book printed using this technology was, fittingly, The Bible. The Gutenberg Bible, completed around 1455, was a marvel of its time, but its true significance wasn't just its beauty, it was its potential. Suddenly, the costs of producing a book plummeted. What once took a scribe a year to copy could now be replicated hundreds of times over in a matter of weeks. Printing shops began to spring up across Europe, first in Germany, then Italy, France, England, and beyond. A torrent of information was unleashed. This is where the real revolution begins. The availability of books ignited a hunger for literacy. As books became more affordable, more people had a reason to learn to read. And what did they read? Everything. Ancient texts from Greece and Rome, once lost or locked away in monasteries, were rediscovered, translated, and printed for a wider audience. The philosophies of Plato, the histories of Herodotus, the dramas of Sophocles, these works sparked a renewed interest in classical antiquity and humanism. Humanism was a key intellectual movement of the Renaissance. It placed a new emphasis on human potential, reason, and individual achievement, a stark contrast to the medieval focus on religious dogma and the afterlife. Thinkers like Petrarch and Erasmus championed the idea that humans were capable of great things through education and rational thought. The printing press was the engine that drove this movement, disseminating these new ideas far and wide. It allowed scholars from different countries to read each other's work, to debate, and to build upon a shared body of knowledge. This created an international community of intellectuals, the Republic of Letters, connected by the printed word. The impact on science was equally profound. Scientists like Copernicus, who proposed that the Earth revolved around the Sun, could now publish their findings. His book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres was printed and circulated, allowing other astronomers like Galileo and Kepler to study, verify, and expand upon his work. This ability to share data and theories accurately and widely was fundamental to the scientific revolution. No longer were scientists working in isolation. They were part of a collaborative, cumulative enterprise. The printed diagram and the precise mathematical table became essential tools for scientific advancement. And, of course, we can't talk about the Renaissance without mentioning the arts. While the printing press didn't paint the Sistine Chapel, it revolutionized how artistic knowledge was shared. Treatises on perspective by artists like Alberti and technical manuals on anatomy for artists were printed, allowing techniques developed in Florence or Rome to be studied by artists in Germany or the Netherlands. Engravings and woodcuts could reproduce famous artworks, making them accessible to people who could never travel to see the originals. This helped to create a more unified European artistic style and accelerated the pace of innovation. But the revolution wasn't just for scholars and artists. The printing press democratized information. It broke the monopoly on knowledge held by the church and the ruling class. This had enormous consequences, most notably in the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door. In previous eras, his critique might have remained a local affair, but his theses were quickly taken down, printed, and distributed across Germany and Europe within weeks. Luther's arguments, printed in vernacular German rather than Latin, could be read and understood by ordinary people. The printing press became his most powerful tool, allowing him to bypass the authority of the church and speak directly to the populace. The Reformation was, in many ways, the first major mass media campaign in history, fueled by the power of print. The rise of printing also helped to standardize languages. Before the press, dialects varied wildly from town to town. But as printers in Paris, for example, published more and more books in a specific Parisian French, that dialect became the standard. The same happened with Tuscan Italian, Castilian, Spanish, and the English of London. This linguistic standardization was crucial for the development of national identities. People who read the same books in the same language began to feel a sense of shared culture and community that transcended their local region. So, when we look back at the brilliant art of Michelangelo or the genius of Leonardo da Vinci, we must remember the quieter but equally powerful revolution happening in the workshops of printers. The Renaissance was an explosion of creativity and intellect, a time when humanity rediscovered its past and boldly charted its future. The printing press was the catalyst for it all. It turned information from a trickle into a flood, empowering individuals, challenging old authorities, and laying the groundwork for the modern world. It was, without a doubt, one of the most important inventions in human history. Theater and performance in the Renaissance. Up next, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most explosive and revolutionary eras in performance history. Get ready to travel back in time from the 14th to the 17th century to a world where theater wasn't just entertainment, it was a cultural phenomenon that reshaped society. So, what exactly was going on? The Renaissance, meaning rebirth, was a period of incredible change in Europe. People started looking back to the classical ideals of ancient Greece and Rome. And this wasn't just in painting and sculpture. Theater experienced its own magnificent rebirth for the first time in centuries. Secular, professional theater companies began to emerge, moving away from the purely religious plays that had dominated the Middle Ages. Let's set the scene in Italy, the cradle of the Renaissance. This is where we see the birth of something truly special. Commedia dell'arte. Forget rigid scripts and somber tones. Commedia was all about improvisation, energy, and stock characters that audiences knew and loved. You had the wily servant Arlecchino, the greedy old Pantalone, and the boastful but cowardly. These weren't just actors. They were master improvisers, traveling from town to town, setting up simple stages, and delighting crowds with their physical comedy, acrobatics, and witty dialogue. Their influence was immense, laying the groundwork for physical comedy that we still see today, from silent films to modern sitcoms. While Italy was buzzing with commedia, something equally groundbreaking was happening over in England. This was the Elizabethan and Jacobean era, the age of Shakespeare. London became a theater hotspot. Purpose-built, permanent playhouses started popping up like the famous Globe Theatre. Can you imagine it? An open-air, multi-level structure where thousands of people from every social class would gather. The wealthy sat in covered galleries, while the common folk, known as groundlings, stood in the open yard right in front of the stage, eating, drinking, and sometimes heckling the actors. The plays themselves were a spectacle. Unlike the Italian focus on improv, English theater was driven by the power of language. Playwrights like William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson crafted intricate plots and penned some of the most beautiful poetry ever written. They explored everything from tragic love stories like Romeo and Juliet to complex political dramas like Macbeth and laugh-out-loud comedies like A Midsummer Night's Dream. These weren't just stories. They were profound explorations of the human condition, tackling themes of love, jealousy, ambition, and revenge with a depth that still resonates with us hundreds of years later. And the actors, for the first time, acting became a legitimate professional career. All-male acting troupes, like Shakespeare's own Lord Chamberlain's Men, became, since women weren't allowed on the English stage at the time. Young boys with unbroken voices played all the female roles, a fascinating convention that required immense skill and suspension of disbelief from the audience. These companies were run like businesses, with the shareholders, costumes, and a constant demand for new plays to keep audiences coming back. Now let's journey to Spain, which was experiencing its own siglo de oro, or golden age of theater. Much like in England, permanent theaters called corrales de comedias became fixtures in cities like Madrid. These were often built in the open-air courtyards between buildings. Spanish theater was vibrant and prolific. Playwrights like Lope de Vega, who supposedly wrote over 1,000 plays, and Calderón de la Barca, famous for his philosophical drama Life is a Dream, captivated audiences. Spanish plays often revolved around themes of honor, religion, and love, blending comedy and tragedy in a way that was uniquely Spanish. So, what was the big picture? What did all this mean? The Renaissance transformed theater from a sporadic, mostly religious activity into a professional, commercial art form that was accessible to the mass. It gave us the first permanent theater since antiquity. It established acting and playwriting as respected professions, and most importantly, it shifted the focus of storytelling. While religious themes were still present, Renaissance theater put humanity center stage. It explored our flaws, our glories, our passions, and our complexities in a way that was fresh, exciting, and deeply relatable. The innovations of this period are the bedrock of Western theater. The character archetypes from Commedia dell'arte, the poetic depth of Shakespeare, and the dramatic structures from the Spanish Golden Age all created a rich legacy that playwrights and performers continue to draw from. Every time you watch a play, go to the movies, or even laugh at a TV show, you are experiencing the echoes of the Renaissance. It was a time when the stage truly became a mirror to the world, reflecting a society bursting with new ideas, new art, and a new understanding of what it means to be human. Ever wondered what it was like to be at a party with Leonardo da Vinci or William Shakespeare? While we can't time travel, we can get pretty close by exploring the poetry and music of their time, the Renaissance. This incredible period, stretching from the 14th to the 17th century, wasn't just about painting and sculpture. It was a golden age for the arts you could hear and feel, especially within the lavish royal courts of Europe. Imagine stepping into a grand hall. The walls are covered in rich tapestries. Candlelight flickers off gold embroidery, and the most powerful people in the kingdom are gathered. This is the world where poetry and music weren't just entertainment. They were currency. They were tools for power, persuasion, and prestige. Kings and queens like Elizabeth I of England or Francis I of France knew that a magnificent court reflected their own glory, so they became the ultimate patrons, sponsoring the most talented poets and musicians of the day. For a poet or composer, securing a position at court was like winning the lottery. It meant a steady income, a high-status position, and, most importantly, a captive audience. With the monarch's ear, these artists weren't just background noise. They were an integral part of court life. They composed music for royal weddings, wrote poems for state visits, and created elaborate performances called masques for festive celebrations. Their job was to beautify daily life and immortalize the reign of their patrons. Let's talk about the poetry first. Renaissance court poetry was often deeply personal and intricate. The sonnet, a 40-line poem with a strict rhyme scheme, became incredibly popular. Poets like Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, brought the Italian sonnet form into English, often writing about the torments and ecstasies of love. This wasn't just diary writing, though. Love poetry was often a sophisticated game, a way to flatter a powerful lady at court, or even the queen herself, without being too direct. It was filled with clever metaphors, classical allusions, and a display of intellectual brilliance. A well-crafted poem could win you favor, while a clumsy one could make you a laughingstock. Queen Elizabeth I was a master of this game. She was not only a patron but a poet herself. She understood the power of words and cultivated an image of the Virgin Queen, courted by her loyal subjects through poetry and music. Courtiers like Sir Walter Raleigh would write poems praising her beauty and wisdom, and in doing so, they were also subtly advancing their own political careers. It was a delicate dance of flattery and ambition, all performed through verse. Now, let's add the music. Renaissance court music was just as layered and sophisticated. One of the most important developments was the rise of polyphony, where multiple independent melodic lines are woven together to create a rich, complex tapestry of sound. Imagine several voices singing different, beautiful melodies that all harmonize perfectly. It was a musical reflection of the era's fascination with order, balance, and divine harmony. Composers like Jacques des Prez in France or Thomas Tallis and William Byrd in England were the rock stars of their time. They composed sacred music for the royal chapels, like massas and motets that would fill the cathedrals with heavenly sound. But they also wrote secular music for entertainment. The madrigal, a type of song for a small group of singers, became all the rage. Madrigals were often settings of popular poems, and they were famous for their word painting, where the music would literally imitate the meaning of the words. If the poem mentioned a sigh, the music might feature a descending, mournful line. If it spoke of birds flying, you'd hear fluttering, rapid notes. Think of it this way. A courtier might write a love poem. That poem could then be set to music by a court composer and performed by a group of skilled singers after dinner. It was a multimedia experience. Renaissance. This fusion of poetry and music was everywhere. Lute songs were particularly popular. The lute, a pear-shaped stringed instrument, was the guitar of the Renaissance. A solo singer would accompany themselves on the lute, performing intimate and expressive songs. John Dowland, an English composer, was a master of the lute song. His works are often melancholic and intensely beautiful, perfectly capturing the Renaissance fascination with love and loss. These performances weren't just for listening. Music was central to courtly dance. The nobility was expected to be proficient in dances like the pavan, a slow processional dance, and the galliard, a lively, leaping dance. Composers wrote endless suites of dance music, providing the soundtrack for social interaction and flirtation on the dance floor. To dance well was to show your grace, education, and social standing. So, when we look back at the royal courts of the Renaissance, we see a world where art was woven into the very fabric of power. Poetry wasn't just read, it was recited, sung, and used as a tool for social navigation. Music wasn't just a background ambient, it was a statement of wealth, sophistication, and divine order. The collaboration between poets and musicians created a vibrant, dynamic culture that still resonates with us today. The next time you hear a sonnet or a piece of Renaissance lute music, close your eyes and imagine the flickering candlelight, the rustle of silk, and the intricate dance of art and power in a long-lost royal court. Thanks so much for journeying back in time with me today. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the arts of the Renaissance, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into history and culture. Let me know in the comments which Renaissance artists is your favorite. See you next time.